Thank you for joining us. Over the years, in addition to presenting cultural content with a view to intelligent and peaceful solutions for all, we also cover a broad spectrum of subjects from travel, tourism, technology, breakthroughs in health, and other subjects. With all the worries we unfortunately have at this time in history and other possible emergencies, whatever we can responsibly do to reduce stress, the better it is. Mr. Bryan Ganz will tell us about his unique peace of mind products and later a comment from Marc Goldman following these messages.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
Joining us now is Bryan Ganz. Bryan, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. We've talked a little about your incredible invention. Tell us a little bit more about the Byrna.
First, Richard, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate this opportunity. As you and I have discussed, the Byrna is a personal security device that is designed to look like a handgun, but is completely non-lethal. It provides the owner with the ability to stop a threat at distances up to 60 feet using chemical irritant rounds that are filled with pepper and tear gas, but without the risk of taking a life, without the risk of causing permanent injury. But unlike pepper spray or a taser, you can do this at a standoff distance where you're safe. The problem with some of these other weapons, like a pepper spray or a taser, is that you're almost in close quarter combat before they're effective.
This is absolutely correct. And the truth is, the actual visual appearance of the Byrna is a deterrent in itself.
It is. It's interesting. I was on a radio talk show a couple of weeks back. It was a Second Amendment show. And the host asked me a question. He says, has the Byrna actually been used to stop any crimes, to save any lives? And I said, in fact, it's many, many dozens, perhaps at this time, well over 100 incidents of people foiling a home invasion, stopping a mugging, stopping a carjacking. And the interesting thing, I said, is that most of the time, they never had to pull the trigger. Now, what this host said to me, he says, that's very consistent with the NRA statistics, which say that 92% of the time that somebody uses a gun to stop a crime, they do not have to pull the trigger because, frankly, Richard, most criminals are cowards. They're looking for the easy opportunity. And as soon as they see that somebody is willing to stand up for themselves, as soon as they see that there's going to be opposition, they back away. Now, that said, of course, you can't use a toy gun because 8% of the time they don't back away, and you do have to discharge the weapon, and you do have to make sure that it is going to stop an assailant. But the form factor in and of itself is a deterrent.
I think it's absolutely amazing because the peace of mind that it would bring to such a high percentage of individuals who are really extremely frightened and hesitant to pull a lethal weapon out to defend themselves and think, oh my God, if I shoot this assailant, what harm is it going to cause my family and me? I'll be in court forever. But the Byrna deters, and if it needs to be used, it would disable the assailant at a safe distance until the police arrive or until the victim can escape, actually.
That's exactly correct. And like yourself, I've been a gun owner for many, many years. And I always carried a concealed weapon with me because I wanted to be prepared. And I felt the one time that I didn't would be the one time that I needed it. But, if I were really honest with myself, Richard, I don't know how quick I would be to pull that trigger. And if I hesitated, would that be a fatal second for me? And if I didn't hesitate, would I be making a fatal mistake? So, I really wanted to carry something that I knew that I wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. Now, I rarely carry my 9mm Glock anymore. I always carry my Byrna because I know I'm not going to hesitate to pull the trigger. And if I make a mistake, if I shoot the paper boy coming up the driveway, well, you know what? I'll leave a bigger tip at Christmas, but 30 minutes later, he'll be fine. There's no harm, no injury, no permanent effects of shooting somebody with the Byrna.
Absolutely fascinating. And due to the increasing stress that people are under at this very odd, frightful time in history, I think with so much anxiety and people afraid for their families and themselves, this has a very powerful, beneficial effect on one's sense of safety and peace of mind. I think that's really amazing because I share the same feelings you just expressed.
It is interesting. There's been a fraying of the social fabric in America. People are afraid. Last year, 2020, there were 23 million guns sold in America. But more important than that, there were 8.4 million guns sold to first-time gun buyers. You think about that for a second. 8.4 million Americans who up until that point had never owned a firearm decided that they needed to buy a lethal weapon to protect themselves, their family, their community. What percentage of those gun buyers would have been willing to buy a Byrna if they knew it existed? 10%? 840,000? Well, 10% at 840,000 is 8 times what we sold in Byrnas since the inception of the company. So we are just beginning to scratch the surface. I feel like Johnny Appleseed going out and, just spreading the word, planting the seeds of people using non-lethal as a viable way to protect themselves.
It is a must-have product, I believe, and I here in South Florida will certainly be proudly carrying this with me from now on, and I want to thank you. I've never ever shown a device like this, a self-defense item or firearm, on the show in 41 years on the air. The Shalom Show obviously means peace. We look for intelligent solutions, rational solutions worldwide for all people, everywhere, in the Middle East and of course here. And personally, I'm astonished by the insane decline in social values, the politically correct rubbish, the hypocrisy. It's insidious and sinister.
It is. And the Byrna saves lives because people today, with this social unrest, with this civil unrest that we're seeing, people want to protect themselves. But when you're carrying a Byrna, you are not carrying a lethal firearm, which means everybody who's carrying a Byrna can protect themselves without the risk of taking a life. And let's face it, Richard, even if you take a life in self-defense, even if it's justified, as you said earlier, your life is going to change forever. It's going to change legally. It's going to change financially. Perhaps most of all, it's going to change psychologically, emotionally, the idea of taking somebody else's life. And what we're doing is not to say that we are against lethal firearms. I happen to own 3 of them. But I also want to have a non-lethal option. When we started off in this business, we produced 3D printed prototypes of the Byrna. And we would go to gun shows and we would put them on the table and we would draw a pretty good crowd. And I would say to them what I said to you earlier, which is, I don't know how quick I would be to pull the trigger. And if I hesitated, would it be a fatal second for me? And if I didn't hesitate, would I make a fatal mistake? Then I would say, I don't know if I represent 1% or 2% or 10% of gun owners, but I would see everybody nodding their head. So I knew that we were striking a responsive chord. And, as many folks may know, Sean Hannity has been a supporter of the Byrna. He's mentioned it a couple of times on his show. I had a chance to meet with Sean and fire the Byrna in the backyard of his house. And I said to him, Sean, I don't know if I represent 1% or 2%. And he puts his hand up. He says, no, Bryan, I'm also a gun owner. And we represent 90% of gun owners. 90% of gun owners live in mortal fear of ever having to pull the trigger. And then he went on and he said something very interesting to me. He said that I do a lot of work with law enforcement. And I will tell you, law enforcement officers also, 90% live in mortal fear of pulling the trigger. And he said to me, Bryan, if we can get law enforcement to carry a truly safe, effective, reliable, non-lethal way to stop a threat, we are going to save lives. We're going to save lives and we're going to preserve careers, because when an officer is involved in a shooting, oftentimes that's the end of their career. So we feel like, we're providing something very valuable for society, both from the consumer level, civilian level, and also from the law enforcement level.
Absolutely. And these constraints that law-abiding citizens have when they worry about whether they should draw a Glock or other firearm is not shared with criminals. I just think again about those who walked up to a police car in New York a couple of years ago and just executed 2 police officers, shot them in the head for no reason. These are people who defend us, and the disrespect that law enforcement is subjected to is absolutely vile. I remember other scenes where officers were just being sprayed with bottles and cursed. It's really quite disgusting and reprehensible. Please continue.
It's interesting. We do a lot of work with law enforcement. There's almost 200 agencies that carry the Byrna. We were just training ATF officers this week. So we've gotten to know a lot of law enforcement officers. And I was out on the West Coast a couple months ago because we were doing a training day for Sony Motion Picture Studios. So all Sony security guards carry a Byrna instead of a lethal firearm. So a decision was made at Sony headquarters that they did not want to take the risk of arming their guards with lethal firearms. So they decided to give them the Byrna. Because it's in Culver City, we were working closely with the Culver City PD. And I'm just going to show you something I'm very proud of, which is the Culver City PD SWAT patch, which was presented to me when I was out there. But I had a chance to sit with this officer, must have been in his 30s. And he said to me, Bryan, I've been an officer my entire career, my entire adult life. My father was a law enforcement officer. My grandfather was a law enforcement officer. But I'm thinking of leaving the force. I said, well, Adam, why? He says, because we are treated with such disrespect by the community that every night I come home and I'm just disgusted. I'm just frustrated. And I don't know where that change happened, Richard, where, when I was a kid, we would go to school and meet Officer Friendly, and everybody wanted to be a police officer. And when you saw them on the street, you would wave to them and say hello and shake their hand. What happened? I don't know if you have a thought on that.
I just think it is unspeakable. I believe I've always respected and admired all of the good law enforcement personnel in the world, and of course in the United States. Of course, you'll find good and bad people everywhere, but individuals who choose this career are dedicated. They put their lives at risk, and they should be treated with great respect and cooperation.
I agree. And we're doing our best to help law enforcement by providing them with training on non-lethal weapons generally and on the Byrna specifically. And we've gotten a tremendous response from the law enforcement community.
Bryan, please tell us a little bit about your past, how you got into this amazing invention. And you know what? Initiative is key. Having the initiative to come up with an idea and then follow through to fruition. That's astonishing.
Well, I've been somewhat of a serial entrepreneur, Richard. When I got out of law school, I started my own business. I like to say I'm a reformed attorney. I never practiced law. And I've never worked for a company where my own signature was not at the bottom of the paycheck. So over my career, I've gotten very involved in manufacturing businesses and helped with turnarounds. And I got a call from a group of investors that said there's a business that they had invested in called Security Devices. And it was having problems. It was struggling. And would I take a look at it? And when I went to look at the company, at the time they were making this. This is a 40 millimeter impact round. It's fired from a grenade launcher. It's used by law enforcement for crowd control, riots. But you have to have a Class 10 license to shoot this. And there are very few people in America that have a Class 10 license, which allows you to carry a grenade launcher. I happen to be one of them, but only because I'm the CEO of this company. As a result, we could only sell to law enforcement. And while law enforcement is large, 917,000 law enforcement officers in the United States, there's probably 200 million consumers that are a potential opportunity for our product. So we wanted to pivot and create a product for consumers. In order to do that, we had to get outside the purview of the ATF and the State Department that controlled these devices. So we wanted to invent something that used CO2 for propulsion. And I met an engineer from South Africa who had developed a product that was a personal security device, basically the forerunner of the Byrna. And the light bulb went off. And I said, if I can build a 40 millimeter round for consumers, maybe the market is 10,000 people. But if I could build a truly effective, safe, reliable, non-lethal personal security device, the market's in the millions. You know, we, Richard, live sort of at the intersection of gun owners like you and me that don't want to take a life, and non-gun owners who, for whatever reason, whether it's philosophical or because they have small children at home, want some way to protect themselves and their family, but don't want to have a lethal firearm in the house. And, you know, it's a very, very big addressable market. I would guess there's probably 200 million people that fall into that category. Now, there are some people on the far right that say, if it ain't lead, I'm not shooting it. And there's some people on the left that say, if it looks like a gun, I'm not interested. But for that group in the middle, that 60, 70, 80% of sane, reasonable, rational, responsible Americans, having a weapon that they can protect themselves and their family without the risk of taking a life, this is very attractive to them.
And actually, it is not a weapon. It is just a self-defense device, which is highly effective. So it is legal to use. And speaking of legality, it frees one of the anxiety, the extreme anxiety of what happens if I use a real firearm. But in this politically correct, strange world we live in today, this Orwellian, odd, declining nightmare, it is amazing how people can be ostracized for beliefs and thoughts, and what should be illegal is now legal, and opinions. Even brilliant people like Alan Dershowitz, whose book, A Case for Israel, is right behind me here, a Democrat and a genius, actually, interprets the Constitution and is totally objective and fair-minded. He's been ostracized and vilified for expressing his views. And we just did a show on cancel culture, which brings you to the question, are you being criticized for coming up with an intelligent, peacemaking solution?
You know, that is a really interesting question. And the answer is yes. So we believe that we are saving lives. In fact, we know we are saving lives. We have hundreds of people that have reached out to us to say that they've stopped the home invasion, they've stopped the carjacking, they've foiled the mugging. We also have had dozens of police reports where a law enforcement officer used the Byrna instead of their service revolver to stop a crime. So they saved a life on the other end of the weapon. despite the fact that we save lives, we are unable to advertise on Facebook or Instagram or Google or Time Magazine, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, because it looks like a gun. So if you go to our website, which is Byrna.com, Byrna.com, you'll see right on the front page, it says the ungun. This is the ungun because it is not a lethal firearm. And yet we are vilified as if we were selling child pornography for some reason.
What is interesting is the Taliban are allowed to be on Facebook, even though they oppress women, they murder women and children and are abusive. They are on Facebook and God knows what other social media. But you, providing a peace of mind solution, are not.
Yeah, it's so interesting to us. And I think it's just a matter of education, Richard. And that's why we're so appreciative of the opportunity to reach out to your audience, because people don't understand what non-lethal is. So, as we discussed, 8.4 million first-time gun buyers in the United States last year. These are people that never bought a firearm in their life, but were so afraid of what's going on in the streets that they thought that they needed a lethal weapon to protect themselves and their families. It is only because they did not know that there was a non-lethal alternative. And they did not know because it's very difficult for us to get the word out. And it's difficult for us to get the word out because everybody's afraid of being politically correct. We've tried to hire a public relations firm. I have been turned down by literally 24 public relations firms that said, we believe in your product. We think what you're doing is God's work. But you know what? We're afraid that one of our other clients is going to look at it and say, oh, that looks like a gun. We don't want to work with you if you're working with Byrna. So, we're trying to do the right thing, but sometimes it's very difficult.
I think that's pathetic. And I'm just wondering, at this time in history, with companies like yours being persecuted basically or discriminated against for absolutely no reason, what does that really mean? All you're doing is bringing a peace of mind solution that really helps people in their homes feel more at peace, that they don't have to be afraid to defend themselves, and probably will take less psychiatric medication as a result of the Byrna. So what are your final thoughts on this?
Well, Richard, I don't really blame these folks because the society is creating such backlash against anybody that takes a stand. So the easy thing to do is simply to say, we will not allow you to advertise the Byrna on our website, rather than trying to understand our mission. So my goal as CEO of Byrna, is to get people to understand that our mission is to save lives. Our mission is to empower good people. Our mission is to allow people to live safely. And it's only through people like yourself that we're able to get this word out. And we really appreciate your help.
And I appreciate your being with us today, Bryan. We should do this again sometime soon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
With us now is Marc Goldman. Marc, it's always good to have you with us. And I'd like to ask you, after listening to Bryan Ganz and his practical solutions for peace of mind in certain frightening situations, what is your overview thought on what has changed in our society from a conscience and moral point of view that is causing added concern and anxiety more so than before?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure, Richard. So thank you. I think what we're seeing is a very significant moral deterioration in our society. When I say moral deterioration, when we looked at it, that it was a clear understanding from everyone on what's right and what's wrong. And, beginning with the 10 Commandments is the simple and first place to begin, then it was clear everyone understood. The further away we have gotten from that, then we have gotten a more permissive, step by step, degree by degree, this more permissive society, which tolerates behavior that we never would have tolerated, which is so harmful, which is so fear creating amongst most people, because when God is removed from the basic belief of people, then you have that basic change, and there's no clear agreement and understanding on the rules of what's right and what's wrong. On the one hand, there is that excessive permissiveness. On the other side of it, it is you're not allowed to say anything that might offend me. And therefore, there's far more control in a different respect. One of the significant differences that we see in society today compared to not all that long ago was that right and wrong was taught and conscience was instilled very strongly on us. And now, by saying that you can make your own truth and what you want is what counts, now we've taken away that conscience, we've taken away that morality, we've taken away the understanding between people of what's right and what's wrong. So people can do things or will do things to each other that we never would have tolerated not very long ago. And that's very dangerous. That's very fearful. That puts people in a very dangerous place and in a fearful place, instead of feeling like they can walk on the street or go in their home feeling safe. When it's not that way, that is not a healthy thing that is not healthy for society.
I do agree, and want to thank you for your brief comment on this show today. Thank you, sir. And with this, we conclude our program for today.
It's my pleasure to always be with you, Richard, and these messages are very important, and it's important to get them out, and it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.